It's hard to figure out the religious con because you'd like to think that people are smarter than this, but then again, people stole some money to Nigerian princes, so I guess that disproves that. How can anybody be this stupid? I don't know, let's ask the religious. We're going to do a video today from Breaking the Habit. Casey Cole is a popular Catholic YouTuber, and I don't really understand why, because his message is really stop using your brain and just believe. I have no idea how that gains any traction these days, but he has a pretty good following, so I guess it does. Maybe that just proves how many really stupid people there are out there. Anyhow, Casey wants to explain why we should believe in God. Anybody think he's going to have any good reasons? Yeah, neither do I.
The idea of there being a powerful cosmic being responsible for creating and controlling the universe used to be commonplace.
So did believing in a flat earth. So did believing that disease came from demons or bad air. Anyone who argues, well, it used to be, is stupid. Now, we know that a lot of things that a lot of people used to believe are just wrong. I'm hoping that this video is going to get more intelligent from here, but I think we all know that's just not going to be the case. Used to be's aren't even an intelligent thing. I used to be a Christian. Then I got better. So what? Of course, we see this kind of thing a lot in religious videos, and I've pointed it out plenty of times before how much they rely on old dead theists for their ideas. It's pure appealing to authority, even though most modern authorities have come to the conclusion that the idiots of the past were simply wrong. Personally, I don't even care about any authorities. Just because some guy said a thing, that doesn't matter. It doesn't make that thing true. It doesn't do any more than my book says a thing. It's the actual data that matters, and these people, they don't have a thing, do they?
For the vast majority of human history, those who denied supernatural forces would have been in the extreme minority.
And probably dead, which likely explains why so many people at least pretended to believe in gods. It's why I think we need to look at what people do, not what people say. You know, like Matthew 7:16. You will know them by their fruits. So how many modern Christians, since those are the only ones that we can actually examine individually, actually behave as if they were Christian? And in my opinion, that's virtually none of them. How many go to church every week? A quarter of Americans say they do, but if you look at the actual numbers, it's less than 3%. That's about 8 million regular weekly churchgoers. How do we know that? Because Devin Pope at the University of Chicago has been tracking church attendance using cell phone GPS data to tell him where these people really are. So not only are people not actually going to church, but it tells us that Christians, by and large, they're just a bunch of liars. And that's not much of a surprise either, is it?
And so articulating why we believe in one was often unnecessary. That is not the case today. As atheism continues to grow, people of faith are all of a sudden having to defend their own existence.
Not existence, beliefs. And that should be true for everyone, on everything. Of course, the religious in this case, they don't want to do it, even though they should have been doing it all along. Maybe if they had failed 1,000 years ago as badly as they do today, history would have been a whole lot better, or at least a whole lot less bloody, without all the theists murdering anybody who disagreed with them. Yet, this all comes back to comfort, doesn't it? What he's really saying is, well, you shouldn't have to. But you should. I don't hold a single position, at least I don't think so, I haven't found one yet, that I cannot rationally defend. If I were to find one, I'd reject it until I could find a better reason to hold it. That's how rational people work. At least that's how they should work. And I figure it's pretty clear that Casey here, he is not rational. But I guess we'll find out for sure pretty soon.
Is this not just superstition? Has science not debunked the naivete of our ancient forefathers? Untrained in this sort of debate, some Christians attempt to frame their answer in the atheist language.
There is no atheist language. What he's really arguing against here is intellectualism and rationality. He's just saying, be dumb, because that's the only way he can hope to keep anyone in the pews. The Catholics have been hemorrhaging members for decades, and today, according to the Cooperative Election Study, it sits around 17% of Americans that profess Catholicism. Catholic mass attendance has fallen by more than half. These people are in serious trouble. So I get it when the Catholics desperately try to get anyone through the doors that they can. Maybe their priesthood is getting sex-starved with the lack of unsupervised children showing up. I have no idea, but these people are not doing well.
They try to prove mathematically, prove empirically, that there must be a God. Using logic, pointing to the unexplained, presenting what they believe to be forensic evidence of God's past deeds, they engage the question as if it were a question of science.
Because it is. Ultimately, it has to be. Science is the study of anything that is real. Anything that actually exists in or interacts with our reality, that should be discoverable by science. It's just that when these religious con men realized that science found nothing for their imaginary gods, they had to turn to something else to keep the rubes flooding in. And that's why they create this dichotomy between science and faith. One is defensible, the other is absolutely not, but they don't care about the truth, do they? They really just want to believe and have dumb people pay their bills so they don't have to go out and get real jobs where they have to compete and work hard. Who would ever want to do that, right? Certainly not the religious con men, because that's what this is really all about.
But this is simply not the case. Our belief in God is not a matter of fact, not a result of verifiable sense data. It's the result of faith.
Which is stupid. Yes, I know he's not making this video for us. None of them ever are. He's only talking to the gullible morons that he hopes will throw money in the collection plate on Sunday, because that's what he's really after. Or he's really doing it so the Pope gets richer and he can just lie to himself and say, "But my poverty makes the world a better place." No, you're just a sucker, just like all the rest. You've been taken for a ride by your church, and you're too dumb to figure it out on your own. This is why I really kind of pity these people, but in the end, they did it to themselves, and they need to be responsible for their own mistakes. Your faith is entirely empty. Casey, you are a moron.
To look for fingerprints or mathematical proofs is to look for God in the wrong places.
Instead of, say, your head, which is the only place that God probably resides. God is a concept, an imaginary friend intended to coddle the religiously deluded, people not bright enough to stand on their own 2 feet and deal with the real world as it actually is. That is not something that anybody ought to be proud of. Granted, dumb people tend to be dumb, which is why when you watch the overwhelming majority of religious content on YouTube, it becomes really obvious just how ignorant they all are. Religion, it's where IQs go to die. Sad, isn't it?
It's an attempt to replace faith with certainty. The only fact of the matter, what must guide our inquiry into this question, is that we don't know for certain that there's a God.
Tell that to most theists, who will tell you that they are. This is just the ignorant leading around the ignorant by the nose, and that's nothing to be proud of. Religion is just another word for delusion. None of you actually want the truth, the whole truth, the demonstrable truth. In fact, you are terrified of the truth. You are shivering in your echo chambers trying to avoid the truth, because the truth isn't emotionally comforting. But you know what it still is? It's true. You can't avoid the truth no matter how much you try. You can just play make-believe, which is all these people are doing. This just makes these people look stupid. Mostly because they are. And that's not an insult. That's just an acknowledgement of reality. Like it or not, you have to deal with actual reality. And these are people who are just terrified of it.
We don't. At least not in the same way that we know that 2 plus 2 is 4, that gravity is a force that brings bodies of matter together. If God were an observable fact, then there would be no choice to believe, no room for free love, no faith.
And that's a good thing. All of the things that the religious cling to, they are not things that anyone with a brain ought to seek after. They are positively childish, and the religious are people who refuse to grow up and deal with the real world. They'd rather talk to themselves and believe things for which there is no objective evidence, just because it strokes their fragile egos, and that's just dumb. People who fall for this crap have problems. Mental, emotional, and maturity problems. They don't want to be actual intelligent adults. They are terrified of that. Instead, they cling to their imaginary security blankets and just huddle together, hiding from the real world because it's just too scary for them to bear. Who thinks that is a good idea? Who thinks these people are emotionally healthy? Let me know down in the comment section if you do, because I'm just curious.
God is not a fact.
Hey, you said it, not me. Now, I agree with you, God is not a demonstrable fact. God is an emotional security blanket in your head because you refuse to grow up. But by all means, continue to make a fool of yourself, Casey. It's kind of fun to watch.
But that doesn't mean that God can't be known to those who have been given the gift of faith. For those who believe, evidence abounds.
No, it does not. And this is why when we ask them for evidence, actual demonstrable evidence, they've got none to provide. They don't know the difference between evidence, which is demonstrable, and blind faith, which is not. And I just had a conversation with a theist who kept saying atheists wouldn't accept evidence for the immaterial. So I asked him, what would that evidence actually look like? How would he even provide it? Give us an example of actual evidence for the immaterial. And he couldn't do it. I kept asking him to explain what immaterial evidence would even look like, and he couldn't do it. He just kept changing the subject. These people know that they're full of it. They just can't bring themselves to admit it.
For one, we're privileged with innumerable accounts of those who have witnessed God with their own eyes.
Name one. Not what you believe is true, but what you can demonstrate is true. This is right back to faith and fifis. There isn't a single demonstrable eyewitness to anything. The Gospels were written anonymously decades after the supposed facts, and Paul, even by his own admission, never saw anything. He had a drug trip on the road to Damascus. Wanting a thing to be true is not the same thing as demonstrating that it actually is true. Yet the religious, they can't admit that, can they? If he goes somewhere different with this, I'll hit him with it then. Because I don't watch these videos up front or anything, I don't know what he's actually going to say. So we're just discovering Casey's lunacy together for the first time.
Our scriptures testify that for more than a millennia, God spoke to his people through angels, powerful plagues, and direct commands.
My book says a thing. That's really all they have, isn't it? I just really want this to be true, and my book says a thing. Do you realize just how stupid that is? Any religion can say that, and in fact, just about all of them do. Do you now believe Hinduism because the Vedas say a thing? Or do you believe Islam because the Quran says a thing? How about, do you buy into Scientology? No? Then you're just being a hypocrite. But that's really all they've got, right? It's no wonder that they all look so dumb.
Witnesses saw the living and true God of Jesus Christ heal the sick and raise the dead.
Says who? I mean, honestly, aside from your say-so, why should I think that any of this is actually true? You've already said that you have no demonstrable evidence. In fact, you said that it's a bad thing to concern yourself with any verification at all. You just have to believe. Why? Explain that to someone outside of your faith who has no reason to take you or your silly book seriously. They can't. That's why they don't want to talk to us. That's why their churches are emptying out, because more and more people are just looking at their empty drivel and saying, you know, that's really kind of dumb, and just going elsewhere. But he won't admit it, will he? He just wants his beliefs to be true, even though they're not.
A fraud does not have the immediate success that he had. A fake does not transform an entire region of the world overnight.
Neither of which demonstrably happened. Christianity was just another mystery religion until Constantine had a vision in 313 CE and then legalized Christianity. That's not overnight, that was hundreds of years later, and Christianity didn't become a big thing for longer than that. It wasn't until it was enforced by law, when people had no choice, when people could be arrested or killed for not professing belief, that Christianity became a success. Heck, Constantine himself didn't even get baptized until 337 CE, decades later, just before he died. None of that makes any of this true, and it sure didn't happen overnight. Scientology had more immediate success than Christianity did by a long shot. And we all know what a load of bullshit that is. This is not something to be impressed with. It's just not.
People saw with their eyes and professed with their lips a God who worked wonders, who spoke clearly, who heard their prayers and answered them.
That was the claim, yet we know, now that actual research has been done on the subject, that prayer works at a rate indistinguishable from random chance. Prayer isn't even a thing. Prayer is just talking to yourself and hoping that something happens. It doesn't matter what God you pray to, the odds are pretty much the same, and if the person that you're praying about knows that you're doing it, their chances of recovery actually go down. You know, performance anxiety is a bitch, isn't it? So pretty much everything that Casey has said so far has been demonstrably false. But he's not talking to us, is he? You know, the people who have brains and actually check these claims out. He's talking to stupid people who take everything said on faith. They just want to believe it's true. It only takes an actual commitment to the real truth, the demonstrable truth, the facts that we can research on our own and find out what's actually going on, and attempt to go out and verify any of this information that will put them off the faith forever. Because it worked that way for me. It can work that way for you too. Care if it's true. Go find out. You'll find out how absolutely indefensible all of this really is.
For many, their testimony is enough to believe.
Then they're idiots. Because this is the thing, and you can verify this for yourself. Ask anyone who claims to have had an experience with God. Any God, it really doesn't matter. Ask them how they know it was God. They won't have a coherent answer. It's going to come down to faith, but faith doesn't make it true. And I have talked to thousands and thousands of theists over the years, and not one, none of them have ever had a compelling case for why their experience was actually with a real God. That's just what they believe. But belief does not equate to truth. These people are really dumb.
For the more philosophically minded, we find reason to believe because we cannot imagine an infinite regress of time and space.
First off, what you can imagine is entirely irrelevant. Even Einstein, back when he came up with the idea for black holes, because that's what the math said had to exist, he couldn't bring himself to believe it because the idea was so far beyond anything that he could imagine. They're still real, though. There's a supermassive black hole at the center of just about every galaxy that we've ever seen. There are billions and billions and billions of them. In fact, if there is a purpose to the universe, and I forget who said this exactly, it's not my words, it's somebody else's, but if there is a purpose to the universe, it's to make black holes, because they are one of the most common things out there. We have nothing at all to do with this. We are completely irrelevant. Now, once again, Casey's just appealing to fifis and faith, and that is just completely childish. Although that's not exactly a surprise, is it?
Where did it all come from? We can say that humans adapted from primitive monkeys that evolved from primitive mammals that go back to some primitive goo that ultimately go back to the Big Bang.
We don't know, and you don't just get to make something up because you're emotionally uncomfortable not knowing. That's not how this works. But this is how they work, isn't it? Well, I don't get it, therefore God. Sorry, but that's not rational. If you don't know, then you don't know. You don't just get to invent an explanation out of whole cloth because you really wish that you knew. Wishing doesn't mean you do. And that's what the religion is doing, beyond the con job scam that organized religion has been into since time immemorial. It's a support system for the clergy class, nothing more. Go out and beg for your supper and hope you can find people dumb enough to fall for it. Welcome to actual reality, Casey. Maybe stick around, you might learn something useful.
But what caused the Big Bang? Where did these atoms come from? Who created them? To go back and back and back to infinity just doesn't make sense.
It doesn't have to make sense to you. It just has to be true. Notice he asks, who created things? Not what, who. Not brought these things about, created. He's just assuming things that are not remotely in evidence just because he really wants it to be true. So what? What you want is irrelevant, but try convincing those who aren't bright enough to recognize the facts. They won't be able to understand. This is the problem with religion, one of many, many, many. It only caters to dumb people like Casey, people who are too afraid to just deal with the reality that they actually live in, because they don't want that. Reality is scary. They want some magical man in the sky to take care of them so they don't have to die and they don't have to be afraid. And, sorry, those things aren't real. Death happens regardless. You're just fooling yourself and wasting the only life that you actually have on your knees. Hopefully you're not a child on your knees in front of a priest because, you know, those things happen, but these aren't things that anybody ought to be proud of. If you don't care if the things in your head are true, then you are a moron. And we've had enough morons. Knock it off. So that's where we're going to end for the week because otherwise this is going to be very, very, very long. I hadn't planned on making this a two-parter until I got to this point and realized just how long it would be otherwise. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes you just start writing and then go, ooh, holy shit, this is going to be a long one. And then you just cut it into multiple pieces. So whatever. Don't worry, the supercut will come out eventually, and people who want to can watch this in one glorious block of Casey debunking. Not that he really deserves that much attention. Casey Cole is just not worth it. So what do you think so far? It seems to me that Casey's just shooting himself in the foot, at least for anyone with a working brain in their head. You don't go to rational people and then tell them not to be rational, which is pretty much why he's not talking to rational people in the first place, right? He just wants the terminally gullible and the absurdly dumb who are willing to come and sit in his pews and hand over their money for the lie because they just really want to believe. That's how all of these scams work though, right? I don't know about you, but I get these ridiculous come have dinner and listen to a presentation things all the time. They're just going to lie to you, and they're hoping that enough people shell out money to make the expenditures for dinner worthwhile. That's all religion is after all. It's the lies without providing you a good dinner. Because they're looking for people dumb enough to show up at the table who aren't going to ask too many questions and aren't going to think about it too hard. Don't be those people. You're a whole lot smarter than that. Are there good reasons to believe in a God? Not that will convince anyone except the already religiously deluded, and that's kind of the point. They can't come up with any reasons that sound good to anybody but them. But can't anyone do that? Flat earthers can come up with reasons that sound good to other flat earthers, but they sound utterly insane to anyone outside of the cult. Because it is insane. Why can't they figure this out? We're back with Casey Cole and Breaking in the Habit and his increasingly ludicrous reasons to believe in God. Because the truth is, he has no good reasons, only really terrible ones. He just really wants it to be true. He can't demonstrate that any of it is, but this is all about his own personal faith and fifis and absolutely nothing else. And that is just stupid. Not that he cares. Not that any of them care. It just proves what a bunch of buffoons the religious actually are. So let's get back to it.
There must be a first cause, a first mover of history that is outside of time and space.
Says who? This is really the question that flusters a lot of theists, and I'm sure that Casey would be no different. How do they know that? And don't let them pick up the goalposts. Hold their feet to the fire. Because the only answer you're likely to get is, well, it sounds good to me. So what? I've taken to asking them how they can justify that position, leaving their faith and their emotions entirely behind, and they can't even come up with an answer. But I really like the idea. So what? Justify this entire absent your personal emotional state. And they'll just stare at you because they've got nothing else. It's really pretty sad.
There must be a reason why there is something rather than nothing.
Nobody says that there was nothing, or could have even been nothing, but you idiots. That's like saying, why is there Satan and not Ammon? Well, why would there be either? It's all just made up. They just assume things that are consistent with their own personal worldview, but which are not demonstrable in the actual real world. They have never justified their worldview in the first place. It just feels good. And that's kind of a problem, right? Not for them, because they're incapable of considering any other options. They just have to be right because it makes them feel good. But that's dumb. But then again, just look at who we're talking about.
For many, the illogical nature of purely material existence is enough to believe.
Not illogical, scary. And that's what's really going on here. They are terrified to live in a world where they aren't special, where they don't have anybody watching over them and there isn't a divine plan that's just going to whisk them away from death into a magical happy land where they can be orgasmically happy forever. They don't want reality. They are terrified of reality, which is why they make up these fantasy stories in their heads. These are people who have never matured into rational adults. They're still emotionally 6 years old. Then they try to tell us that there's something wrong with us. Yeah, go figure.
Others begin with the human experience, the intimate knowledge of self.
No, they begin with how they want humanity to be. This all comes down to what they wish was true, not what they can demonstrate actually is. They don't have an intimate knowledge of self. They only have beliefs about what they want themselves to be. And this is really, really common. This is the basis for the Dunning-Kruger effect, where people with limited competence vastly overestimate their own abilities, such that they think themselves far more intelligent than they actually are, and far more important than actual experts in the field. And this is why it's so important to take yourself out of the situation, at least as much as you can, and evaluate that evidence independently. Your faith and your fifis don't matter. You don't matter. Only that external evidence does. And they have no interest in that. No interest at all.
Within our being is a desire to know.
But that doesn't mean that you do. This is just Fifi's talking, and Casey plays into that almost all the time. Well, we really wish this was true. But that doesn't make it true. Just because you can talk yourself into believing things that aren't demonstrable, that doesn't mean that you're doing anything of value. In fact, it pretty well proves that you're not. Not that you care or anything.
Our nature is disposed to discovery, self-reflection, and identity, inexhaustible desires within us that reach forward infinitely. With everything we learn, everything we answer, we are left with 10 more questions, leaving us to conclude that we are not beings that will ever be satisfied with something, but rather seeking out infinity itself, God.
But that's just a name that you're slapping onto it. Again, it's something that a lot of religions do. But I want it to be whatever label their faith happens to slap onto it, and suddenly that becomes an imaginary thing to strive after. But that doesn't make any of it real. This is why I say that they don't care. Because they're only after comfort, not objective reality. They don't want to understand the real world that they actually live in. They just want to embrace a security blanket and play make-believe because it's a whole lot easier to deal with than to actually look at what's going on. Sadly, a lot of people try to defend this, not just among the religious, but everywhere. Well, who cares if they believe nonsense if it makes them happy? Well, I do, because our beliefs inform our actions, and if you believe irrational, ridiculous things, then you are more likely to do things that are going to negatively impact society, especially if those beliefs are widespread. You are harming everyone when you believe garbage, at least potentially so. This is self-defense. You people need to be better.
It is against the backdrop of this infinite horizon that we discover who we are and where we are going.
No, because you don't care where you're actually going. You only care about where you want to go. What stories you make up in your heads make you feel the best, but that doesn't matter, does it? We know where you're actually going. You just don't want to go there. You don't want to die. You don't want to cease existing. You have an emotionally vested interest in going on forever and ever and ever and ever. And I'm sorry, but that's not something that exists in the real world. Time to grow up and deal with that. But they won't, will they?
For many, the boundless desire within us is enough to believe.
Then they're stupid. This is why religion caters to the lowest conceivable common denominator. It goes after dumb people, which is why they're so focused in the third world these days. I mean, not that those are bad people by any means. I'm not saying that all people in the third world are dumb, but they tend to have weaknesses that the religious can exploit. They tend to be less educated, and they tend to have more pressing problems for their immediate survival. And if the religious can just lie to them and say, well, just believe this and God will provide, even though God never demonstrably provides anything, then they're a lot more likely to get converts. And that's why they tend to go after the lower classes, because the poor often have nothing to lose. Why not give God a shot? Well, when things look bad, why not indeed? But it still doesn't make any of it true, does it?
But of course, there is a final way to know.
Why does that make me feel like there's a threat coming? Now, these are always impotent threats. Well, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe and give my church money. Really? Prove hell exists beyond your own ludicrous say-so. And they can't do that, which is why they always appeal to faith. With faith, you don't need evidence. You should have it, but faith is where you go when you don't give a damn about the truth. That's what all of these religions push, right? Don't ask questions, don't have doubts. Just believe and fill the collection plate because we say so. Why can't anyone see the obvious problems inherent with that?
It is the purest and most simple of explanations. There are some of us that have personally encountered God.
No, you haven't. Not in any demonstrable way. This is why all of the personal testimonies that I have ever heard don't impress me one bit. There is no direct, demonstrable causal link between your stories and any real, verifiable God. It's just what they want to believe, and when you encounter these people, and you will, don't let them off easy. Don't care what they say. Care about what they can demonstrate. Correct them. Why not? No, you had an encounter with invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies. Why? Because I say so. What are they going to say? Let's see which side has the best evidence. Yeah, nobody has any. That's what faith does to you. It makes you stop caring about the actual truth. Nobody has ever demonstrably had any experiences with a real God. It's all just an emotionally comforting fantasy story, and those don't mean a damn thing.
Maybe we've witnessed a miracle or heard his voice speak within us. Maybe we felt undeniable comfort in the midst of tragedy, had a life-changing experience with no other explanation than God's loving hand.
But you've had absolutely none of that. That's a personal, emotional interpretation, not demonstrable, evidence-based fact. You might believe it, you might really like it, it might make you feel really good, but that doesn't make it true, and it's certainly not going to convince anyone else that it ever happened as you describe. Of course, those conversations don't tend to go anywhere with the religious because they aren't interested in what actually happened. I've run out of fingers and toes when it comes to counting the number of people who can't walk me through the steps that they actually went through, how they actually got to God done it, because they don't care. They don't have an answer to that. They will give you the beginning, and then they'll go, well, here's the stuff I didn't understand, and then they'll jump to, therefore God, because God is their comforting ace in the hole. God answers all questions when they run out of steam looking for actual evidence. It doesn't make any of it true, though, does it?
This is why I believe.
Which is why you're an idiot. This is the kind of stories that we get from most theists, though, isn't it? Here's my personal emotional interpretation of the things that I've seen, filtered through a specific religious lens that I really like the sound of, therefore it's just got to be true. Sorry, but that's just laughable. Because when we ask you to provide evidence for your God, the best you can ever do is say, but it sounds so good to me. That's irrelevant. If I said invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies sound good to me, would you believe it? No, of course not. At least I hope not. I'm hoping you're not that dumb. Yet you can't see that you're doing the exact same thing, and we're just sitting here rolling our eyes, just like you ought to be doing with the pixie comment. You don't get a double standard. Nobody does. You just rely on it and expect everybody else to take you seriously. And that's not going to happen. Deal with it.
Truly.
Yes, you are truly an idiot.
Trusting in others, seeking God in philosophy and anthropology makes sense and give greater meaning to what I know. When it comes down to it, the reason I believe is because I have felt his healing presence in my life.
You've lied to yourself. You've been irrational. You haven't put your beliefs to any kind of objective test. And let's be honest, you just really want it to be true. Faith is the last refuge of the scoundrel. It's what they always fall back on when all of their high and mighty and ultimately empty claims are done away with. And you'll see this with a ton of apologists. William Lane Craig, con man extraordinaire, makes all kinds of arguments and claims, but when it comes right down to it, he only believes because of the supposed witness of the Holy Spirit. He believes because it makes him feel good. He's deluded himself into believing things that are not demonstrably true. And that's kind of a problem, wouldn't you say? How does anyone really argue against that? Well, I just know. No, you don't. Not in any independently verifiable way. You just believe. And just believing is just stupid.
In a time of great distress, I was given comfort and released of my pain. In moments of immense isolation, I have felt a loving embrace. I haven't seen a supernatural being in my midst and haven't had any ecstatic experiences, but I have encountered God on more than a few occasions.
Really? Prove it. Now, of course, he can't and he knows that, which is why he does this. It's a hell of a lot easier to just make emotional claims than to have to trot out verifiable evidence, and the people that he's trying to scam, they're not going to ask any difficult questions regardless. They'll believe anything you tell them so long as it makes them happy, and in turn, they will fill the collection plates because there's an implied threat there that if they don't, then God just might take offense. Well, that's a nice soul you got there. It would be a shame if anything happened to it. Because that's how religion works, and Casey is absolutely no different.
It's the sort of knowing on the level of love, a feeling that burns so powerfully and clearly that nothing could ever call it into question, and yet there's no data to convince another of its existence.
Except there is. Insert all of the fMRI stuff here. Because we can demonstrate love is real. It is a complex electrochemical reaction in your brain. We can see it clearly on brain scans. And that's not what these idiots are talking about, though. They mean it's a feeling. No, it's not. They are describing the subjective experience that they have in their heads when they are in love. And that's why a lot of people think that the human mind is separate from the physical brain. They don't care about what's actually going on. They care what makes them feel good. Even though 100% of the evidence that we have proves conclusively that you are just a reaction inside that meat sack in your head. You are not special. Stop pretending that you are. But people like Casey just show the ludicrous irrationality of a lot of humans. These are not people that you ought to be proud of. This is nothing that you ought to be proud of. You ought to be ashamed if you feel this way. Sadly, a lot of people just aren't.
That feeling, that experience, however nebulous and unverifiable for you, is enough for me.
Then you just keep proving that you are an idiot. This is like the people who are convinced that they were abducted by aliens because there are no other explanations that they are emotionally comforted by, or that they can boldly rationalize their way to, it just feels right, so it's got to be true, even if they have no evidence of any kind that it ever happened. Because that's all this is. It's just a bald rationalization. It's desperately trying to get to that emotionally comforting idea that you started with because it just feels good to you. But that doesn't mean anything, though, and far too many people are only out to stroke their own egos and just don't give a damn about the actual truth. Casey is clearly one of those people. Pretty much everybody on the religious side is as well. Pathetic, huh?
That is what inspires me to believe, what gives me life, that overcomes the many feelings of doubt in my life. Maybe that's sufficient for you, maybe it's not.
It shouldn't be for you. It shouldn't be for anyone. If it is, then you've got some serious emotional and intellectual issues. You are the one with the problems, not us. Granted, they don't like that, but too bad. This is the problem with a ton of people out there, religious and otherwise. They reject actual reality and try to substitute their own, and it doesn't work that way. Sometimes the results are irrelevant. Nothing really changes. Sometimes, like in the case with Casey, the results are potentially catastrophic, resulting in life-altering changes that may or may not be irrational. Here's a guy wearing a dress, living his life for a dude in the Vatican who makes lots and lots of money because he feels things, not because he has any good reason to think that they're actually true. This is really, really stupid, right?
Maybe if put on the spot, if asked to give your own testimony, to proclaim the kerygma yourself, you would give another answer.
I would say you're all idiots. I know back in the day, I probably would have said something similar, although I never had any events in my young life that made me feel like God saved me or anything. But I would have said that I felt God. And then, once I realized just how ridiculous the whole thing was, I learned that those feelings were all self-derived. I had a chemical reaction in my head, and because of my personal religious indoctrination, it just became, God done it. But that doesn't mean that God done it. It doesn't mean that God exists. It was a desire that I had, formed by my religious beliefs and upbringing, and I was just playing along. There was no good reason to think that any of it was actually true. It was all just a story that I told myself in my head, and it's exactly what Casey's doing here.
I tell you again, this is not a hypothetical question. People will ask you. They will want to know. Why, in a world of science, in the age of enlightenment, when so many people are choosing to no longer believe, do you say that there is a God?
Because you're an idiot. Granted, he's just preaching to the choir here, and that's what all of them do, because he doesn't have to back any of this up like he should. He wouldn't try any more than Craig does, because it's only the already faithful that have any real chance of paying him, and that's really what he's after, or at least that's what he's after for his church. The Catholic Church is not a charity after all. They expect people to pay up, even though it isn't official church policy demanding 10% of your income, because according to Catholic Answers, although the church teaches that offering some form of material support to the church is obligatory for all Catholic adults who have the ability to do so, it doesn't specify what percentage of one's income should be given. Yeah, but they've still got their hands out, don't they? Even if it isn't as blatant as, say, the Mormons. But I guess that's neither here nor there, right?
If you want to be a disciple of Christ, if you want to call yourself a Christian, you must be able to answer this question clearly and convincingly.
Then why can none of you do so? I completely reject the whole "it makes me feel good" nonsense as a legitimate and rational answer to the question. Nobody cares about your feelings but you. That isn't going to convince anybody with a brain, which is why you don't talk to people with brains. That you can rationalize your way to it, that doesn't say anything good about your own mental processes, and I think that's kind of the point. It's why, as I think we all know, there's a distinct and demonstrable negative correlation between higher education and religiosity. The smarter you are, the less likely you are to believe. And I think we're seeing why right there on screen, because these people just aren't that bright.
Know the faith so that you can proclaim the faith.
Claim that you know what you want to be true so you can pretend that it is. So why, in a video on why believe in God, is his answer so ludicrously unconvincing? I was hoping for something a little bit more profound, but all we got is, "it makes me feel good." So what? That doesn't make it true, but I think Casey's one of those apologists who doesn't even pretend that Christianity is rational. These are the people who just make me roll my eyes and kind of back away slowly, because these people have some real serious mental problems. Honestly, where else in life is "but it makes me happy" an adequate answer to any serious question? Wanting a thing to be true doesn't make that thing true, and it matters what is true. This is why, when you ask any theist about their supposed experiences with God, they will get to a certain point, and then they'll just say, "well, God done it," because they've run out of demonstrable steps. They just want it to be God. But that doesn't make it God, any more than it makes it leprechauns. Leprechauns did it. Yeah, that's dumb, and changing the name doesn't make it any better. But these are not smart people. I wish they were. At least they wouldn't make such fools of themselves on the internet all the time. But just declaring a thing to be true because you really like the idea, that only shows just how nutty you actually are. And that's not something that you or anyone else should be proud of. Knock it off. At least try for rational credibility. Care about reality. Deal with the world in which you actually live. That should be the most basic expectation that we have for anyone. Why is it not?